guys, welcome back to another of Vendal's weekly arcade quest tutorials. So, today we're going to be talking about the Broken Oath. This is an extremely interesting quest, but before we get into it, I also want to note that we'll be talking about at the very end of the video just some of the new executions that came out with the new patch, and we'll also be talking about, of course, character selection for this quest and what makes it particularly interesting. So first off, this quest is going to be different than anything you've handled before, and that's because it's including a bunch of Guardians. We're talking like the Guardians from Breach mode that normally guard the Shrine or the King. These characters, or these heroes, are really interesting to deal with because of their constant stream of unblockables and how it manifests during the fights that take place during this weekly quest. This weekly quest's first phase was one of the hardest that I've ever dealt with to actually get an honorable clear. There is a way to clear it dishonorably, but it's still fairly difficult because of the positioning of the ledge unless you properly abuse revenge to get through it. So let's talk a little bit about our character choices for this particular weekly quest before we move on. Character choice in this quest is determined, I would say, primarily by the perks that you have. Certain characters have the perk Vengeful Barrier. That's the one that gives you the plus 15 hit point shield after revenge. I personally think this is the best thing that you could take with you into this particular quest, because a lot of this quest you're going to be getting revenge and you're going to be utilizing it repeatedly. So look for a character with that, and then you'll be all good to go. Revenge really is going to be the core mechanic for this fight. You've got to repeatedly be building it up and then using it to actually turn things around on the opponents that are going to be hassling you really hard. Because they have Guardians in the mix, the Guardians are predictable, which is why the revenge style is so useful and why the Vengeful Barrier perk is the most important. That being said, I'm going to show off first the Kensei because it was requested going through this video, and a couple things about how to get through the fights. And thus begins the Broken Oath. So like said, we're going to go ahead and just pick the Kensei here, so that we can show off a little bit about how he works. But I do want to note that I'll be spending a little bit more time talking about the first phase during the second video portion with the Aramusha, as regards to how to do it honorably, because I was not able to beat it honorably with the Kensei. I spent a good duration of time and just could not pull it off. Just kept messing it up. There's some screen flickering there, intentionally brought on by my rage at how difficult this is. So, few things to be aware of though. This fight is essentially going to be a parry and then score revenge repeated outplay. So, the Guardian here has high health regen. This is a huge problem because of his massive pool, and essentially it means that unless you're entirely focused on him, he will be able to out-heal everything that you do. I mean everything. This means that the only viable way to do this fight honorably is to take out the other two first. Now, the AI will always leave one person sitting out in a gank situation so as only to have two people attack you at the same time. You can use this to your advantage and try to force it to be the Guardian as well as one of the AI, because the Guardian is easier to predict and get parries on. Now, like I said, I did not successfully pull this off with the Kensei, and so we'll be talking a little bit more in detail about this after the rest of the quest is finished, but I show here with the Kensei one of the easiest ways to cheese. Again, you want to be using revenge and that ledge. You do have the revenge boost, so it's pretty easy to get revenge. Once you have it, you can tank your way through a few of his hits and then guard break and shove him off the edge, and essentially the principle follows through with the other two as well. Use revenge to get them off the edge, or whatever other tricks you have. If you're not playing as the Kensei, you're someone like the Shinobi, this portion you should have a pretty easy time just getting the last two off the edge after the Guardian. And that'll get you the clear here, and I recommend doing this your first time just so you can experience and customize yourself with Guardian fights in general, before trying to actually pull off this first phase honorably. So the second phase, and third phase, and fourth phase are much easier. Still fairly difficult here on this second phase, but there's some real nice strategies you can employ to make your way through this fight with a reasonable amount of fairness as well. First off, things to note is your modifiers allow you to damage enemy stamina on attack. This means you're going to be able to put people out and out of stamina really easily. No matter which character you play, I recommend just parrying single attack, heavy single attack. Once he's out of stamina, throw him back towards that center and continue to hassle him as long as you can. The reason you want to keep him in this little zone here and not get him into the trap is because A, you'll need the trap later for the Valkyrie, and B, if you let him go too far away, it will trigger the other two's onslaught a little bit sooner, and you'll have a harder time dealing with all three of them at the same time. Now, you can bait out his revenge. That's another thing to remember, especially if he's out of stamina, he's always going to try to trigger that revenge, so make sure you feint it. Now, the Valkyrie, it's wonderful because the bleed damage from that attack won't quite kill her. This is extremely important because both of the extra AIs in this fight have respawn. This means that unless you execute them, they will return to the fight, which is why utilizing that bleed bomb to get the Valkyrie at critical health and then finishing her off with a single heavy is exceedingly important. After that, you'll be just you up against the Raider. You can, if you want to, troll him a little bit. There's some ledges up at the top that you can utilize that you'll be able to get to if you dodge roll well enough. But generally speaking, he's not that hard to deal with, or she is not that hard to deal with, simply because you still have that ability to exhaust their stamina. Use that, beat them up, break them down, abuse their out of stamina, and you'll make your way through it. They will parry a few of your attacks, but you'll do just fine. Another thing to note with the Kensei matchup in particular is the Kensei has a very good dodge attack. It's predictable for players, sure, but AIs seem to parry it less than other attacks for some reason. And that's just something that's really handy to use. So I highly recommend utilizing the Kensei's dodge attack during these trials in this arcade mode weekly quest. None shall pass. This one's really easy. Like, really easy. So I'm not even going to really talk about it. I'm just going to speed it up. It's you up against a single Guardian. Parry each one of his heavies. You have a regenerating giant shield, and you do more damage if your health over goes down. He does a lot of damage, but the chance of him actually getting more than a single hit in, if you're being careful, is really limited. Also, if you really wanted to cheat, you could knock him off one of the ledges at the very beginning of the bridge. I speed this up because this is extremely repetitive play. Parry, heavy. Parry, heavy. Parry, heavy. Get him into the flame if you want to. Parry, heavy. Yeah, this isn't even a trial. You could do this with any character because all it relies on is just your ability to parry and anticipate when he's going to use revenge. This is one of the new Kensei executions also that I show off there right there at the end. I really like it. It's one of the more peaceful and respectful kills, which makes it kind of fun. And now we're in the final phase, War's Deliverance, which can be really easy or really hard depending on how you go about it. It can be really fun to do this the alternative, really hard version, but like said, it's far more difficult. The essential principle behind the really hard version is running and getting all three of them aggroed to you before you start handling any of them, and therefore fighting all three at the same time. And with Guardians, it gets interesting just because of unblockables and how they start to stagger with each other and what can happen if things go wrong. There's a couple reasons for this. One, the first guy here does fire damage. Two, another one of the ones out there blinds you on hit, and then the other guy reduces stamina. And therefore it's interesting because if you try to fight all three at the same time and any of them get a hit off, you're actually going to be in a pretty good world of hurt because it's hard to tell what's happening once you've been blinded. But the proper way to do this fight is to essentially try to take them out one at a time, starting with this fellow here because he has hit points regen on hit, therefore he's definitely the primary target to take out first so that he can't capitalize on any hits that happen during the actual fight with the remaining ones. Once you take him out, if you've dragged him into this corridor or not, the next person that will show up is the Samurai variant of the Guardian, and he again is fairly easy to handle as long as you utilize the same exact tactics that you should employ for every single Guardian. Just repeated heavy and parry. Once the two of them engage you, that's when things get a little bit more interesting. You have to try to measure your hits so that you're parrying both of them. If you're only going to parry one, I don't recommend swinging because you will get heavy hit by the other. That being said, you do have a regenerating large shield, and so it's really not that hard to handle. Abuse your revenge again, and you'll be able to floor them and then clean things up. Obviously, because I wasn't paying complete attention here and I let them sneak a few hits in, they did manage to down my shields quite quickly and get me into low health. And therefore, I'm left in a slightly dangerous spot with this last guy. Which is why I really just recommend the pattern of parry, heavy, parry, heavy. Don't try to do anything fancy, because if you do, you're only going to end up getting yourself either killed or just taking a longer time because of how it works out. Carry your way through it, and eventually you'll get through. This quest is pretty simple. Again though, just a reminder, if you are interested in having fun with this weekly quest, try fighting all three of them at the same time, or utilizing some of the area to get drop attacks on them, because it's kind of funny how it works out. And you can have a lot of fun with this quest. I enjoyed it quite thoroughly. So while that's finishing up, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the appropriate measures to deal with Phase 1 before we even get into it. After this quest finishes, and the victory screen shows up, I'll be moving into Phase 1 and going through the whole quest chain again with the Aramusha. So, a couple things to note. The Aramusha still has that nice advantage of the Blade Blockade, which can help you during the Orochi's Light Spam or the Aramusha's Feint game if you're smart about it, but generally speaking, you're still going to want to be focused on just parries. What makes the fight much easier with the Aramusha, in my opinion, is simply the Vengeful Barrier perk, which does apply in arcade mode. That Vengeful Barrier allows you to actually come back a little bit every time your revenge finishes with just a little bit more shield, so that you can recover and hold out for a little bit longer. Essentially, the strategy here, like I said earlier, is to pair off so you're fighting one of the two AIs plus the Guardian. This allows you to get easy parries and build revenge easily, utilizing the Guardian's slow and predictable attacks. When you do have revenge, use it only to beat up the alternative characters, the ads, the Orochi or the Aramusha. Because, again, that Guardian has a ridiculous amount of health regen. It doesn't matter how hard you hit him, if you pause for even a moment in between parries and heavies, he's going to over-regen, and thus you won't be able to take him out, essentially, until the other two are dead. So, utilize that strategy. Both of them have low damage, so they're actually not going to kill you that terribly. They're not going to hit you that hard when they do get hits in. So, really, you need to be looking out primarily for the Guardian strikes. Of course, with the Feint game that both of them can play, the Aramusha in particular, they're really tough to handle, and it does take a while to pull even this off with Vengeful Barrier. But eventually, you'll manage to get through it, and then you just continue to push your way through with the Guardian until it's finished. And really take things slow here, because trust me, if you get this far, you don't want to screw it up and have to fight the Orochi and the Aramusha again, because it's just, it's awful. It's a nightmare. But yeah, that's essentially all there is to it strategy-wise. Pair off with the AI and the Guardian. Make sure you're primarily parrying the Guardian's attacks, which are predictable. Utilize revenge then to kill the ads. Also utilize your ability to switch targets to fake out the ads. They're less likely to parry if you're target switching. So during the second phase, this was actually my very first attempt, which should tell you something about how much easier this one is in comparison to the other one. I didn't have a strategy yet going through, but I'm still able to to make my way through the quest, just because I can handle the Valkyrie and the Raider here fairly easily. You'll remember from last week that a Valkyrie and Raider combination gave me a lot of trouble, and probably some other people a lot of trouble too. The reason for that is you'll note the modifiers were different. These ones are both weaker, they just respawn. Therefore, that respawn is really the only thing you have to worry about. They're going to do less damage to you. Therefore, their max punishes aren't going to be as scary if you do get flipped on your feet. Additionally, it was the combination of uninterruptible that the other characters had and completely unblockable that the Radar had in the last weekly quest that made them such a duo that was so impossibly hard to handle. So this next little fight we're going to put into 4 times speed because honestly, you don't need to see this again. It's just parries and heavies and really simple. Gotta note though, this theme music is rather interesting sped up. Give it a listen. And there we go. Alright, so for War's Deliverance, this quest is still fairly easy, unless you're being dumb and you dink around at the very beginning. The reason for this is, like we already discussed, if you spend time dinking around or you intentionally pull all 3, you end up having to fight all 3 at the same time, which can actually prove to be fairly difficult. However, again, reminder that it can be fun to actually utilize the environment or attempt to fight all 3 here for a while. It's a little interesting in that manner. But really, this fight just turns into, you know, the standard parry heavy that we've been talking about the entirety of this video. I still keep this in just so you can see that I completed it with the Aramusha. But also just a reminder about how Guardian combat works. Don't try to do anything fancy and you'll make it through. Anytime you try to do fancy things, that's when you're likely to screw up during combat with the Guardians. And I really recommend, just plugging for this again, your first time on Phase 1, try to go through it the cheap way. Just because you want to get to Phase 2, 3, and 4, all 3 of them will better train you and better prepare you for dealing with Phase 1. And then you won't have as rough of a time when you try to do Phase 1 honorably. With that, this weekly quest is over. But I wanted to go ahead and just take a little bit of time to just show off some of the new executions. We're going to do it in 2 times speed just because there's a lot of characters to get through, as I kind of just discussed my opinion of them. If you're taking off at this point, always remember that modifiers modify your playstyle. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy sticking around and hearing my discussion of some of the new executions. So this Nobushi flip trick here, this one is definitely one of my new favorites. I haven't liked any of the Nobushi's executions, but this one in particular is just a lot of fun because of the acrobatics involved. The Shigoki one is nice because of the momentum he gets with the throw, but honestly the whole principle of breaking a neck one-handed has always kind of bothered me a little bit. It's extreme. I love the Kensei one. The new respect that's associated with it is something I've always enjoyed in the game. The comical, eventful kills are pleasant and exciting, but honestly, they've never really been my favorite. They're kind of, well, prideful, and they can encourage salt sometimes to a certain degree, especially in the Shaman or Centurion's case. So next up, the Orochi. His new one's alright. It's a really nice flip trick, but honestly, his little kick at the end feels kind of weak to me. I feel like they could have animated that more interestingly or given him a cooler movement for that, so it's kind of disappointing. The Shinobi one is essentially a blade flurry. It's pretty. I like it. The Shinobi's ones are typically pretty gimmicky. Some of my favorites of his are kind of fun that involve, of course, the actual throwing of the Kusurigama, but, you know. Chiandi one is fun because it's the first time you see a feint, really, in, actually, that may not be true. Centurion might have fainted. But the Chiandi one is fun just because of its association with the feint and then the backstrike and the good throwing distance. I hate this one on the Nuxia. One, I've always hated the Nuxia just on the principle of her weapons. Let's just be honest, those things don't work in combat and you could never cut off someone's head with them. Seriously, guys, it's just impossible. Okay, so Zhang Jun. Zhang Jun, I don't know how to pronounce his name still. This is cool. It's just a good punch, but it feels nice on him. The Shaolin's is really fun. It's interesting, it's comical, it's a good play-by-play in combat, but the Shaolin has a lot of cool executions already, so it's not anything unusual. This one, for the Shaman, is disgusting. You know, I don't even have decapitations and bleeding on, but you can tell right here that she's just like watching her bleed out. It kind of makes me uncomfortable. The Shaman's executions bother me slightly. Valkyrie one, it's cool, but it's just basically a big baseball swing. It's nothing super special. The Warlord one is fun just because of the unique timing in it and how clever it is, but it's still not necessarily my favorite of his either. The Radar one I actually quite like. The difficulty of the uppercut throw and the distance he gets on it is quite realistic, but also interesting for how it launches off the blade. Also requires a massive amount of strength to perform. This Berserker one is probably one of my new favorites. Berserker has excellent emotes and executions. From his flip one, to his spin one, to his, drop kick, to all the different things that he has. A lot of his look really, really clean. And I just want to say that I feel like the Berserker's got some of the best executions in the game. If a developer ever watches this video, give other people more executions like this. I mean, even that just little double stab one emphasizes his character as he does the little headbang afterwards. But this new one is another really strong addition to his set of executions. Highlander one is brutal. Normally it's just like I said, the Shaman that makes me uncomfortable, but this one makes me really uncomfortable. It's comical, I'll give it that, but getting stabbed in the eye with that, and just, there's not even like an absolute kill slash here. The stabbing in the eye wouldn't necessarily kill you. That one's uncomfortable. Centurion 1 is taken straight from the movie Troy. This is how Achilles kills one of the combatants during one of the early wars in the show before the fight with Troy. And it's a beautiful example of ridiculous fantasy-based combat, because you could not clean slice a blade into someone like that. But, the Peacekeeper one's pretty quick and simple. It's another nice just mix-up on blades. The Warden one is decently brutal, and that kind of makes it fun. He always exploits or shows off his half-handing technique a little bit. Conqueror one is a little paradey and then just a big heavy hit. It's fun, but he is better. Lawbringer one is probably my favorite of this batch. This one's just so properly done. The positioning, the original stab, the feel that you get with that immense hit. Also, when we're talking about realistic here, that halberd is one of the few weapons that actually could definitely remove a head. Removing a head, actually cutting through the spine, is not as easy as this game tends to make it look. Just in general. It's not realistic. Gladiator 1 is kind of cool, kind of interesting, but maybe not the best physics. The Aramusha one actually kind of bores me. Well, that's it for this lengthy video. Thank you guys if you watched the whole way through. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you guys next week. Good luck on this quest, because it is a difficult one. And remember, modifiers modify your playstyle.